Good morning, America. Breaking overnight, finally free. After the largest prisoner swap since the Cold War, 3 Americans wrongfully detained by Russia returning home, greeted by their families, President Biden and Vice President Harris. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, former Marine Paul Whelan, and Russian-American journalist Alsu Kurmasheva.
Now she gets to celebrate with her mom. That's what this is all about. Families able to be together again, like they should have been all along.
This morning, what's next for them? And new details about the tense negotiations.
Today was a very good day.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who helped broker the deal, joins us as Olympian and former Russian prisoner Brittany Griner and her wife Sherelle express their joy and relief.
Vice President Harris closing in on locking up the Democratic presidential nomination as she nears a decision on her running mate.
Relentless heat. Nearly 150 million Americans still under heat alerts, plus the potential tropical threat that could impact the U.S. Ginger is tracking it all.
Countdown to back to school. How to take advantage of tax-free holidays for school supplies. We'll tell you when and which states have the biggest savings.
We're making waves at the Jersey Shore.
Show me the money!
We'll tell you how to know if your state owes you interest on missing money.
And we're blown away by Team USA. Asia and Stewie at it again, ruling the court. Beach volleyball serving up a big win, and fencing striking gold. Plus the GOAT defying gravity, Simone Biles soaring. Now she's the first 2-time all-round champion. As Katie Ledecky becomes the most decorated U.S. woman in Olympic history, 13 medals, wow. And just moments ago, Sha'Carri Richardson sprinting us into the weekend, racing to her Olympic debut.
Live in Times Square, this is Good Morning America.
So much to talk about the Olympics. Good morning, America. And you hear this voice? Well, I hear a lot of crowds.
The people have spoken.
Yes, we certainly hear the crowds. The reason? Carrie Underwood, that woman, joining us live on GMA in Central Park. We cannot wait to get there, and so much action at the Olympics in the past 24 hours. We will have the very latest from Paris just ahead.
Definitely looking forward to that. It's also a very good morning for those Americans waking up free and back home. They arrived at Joint Base Andrews outside Washington overnight after their long ordeal in Russia. Former Marine Paul Whelan and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich reunited with their families. Take a look at the Wall Street Journal's front page right here this morning, celebrating Evan's freedom.
Incredibly powerful. The Americans are now in San Antonio this morning at Brooke Army Medical Center as they take the first steps to returning to their lives. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but we begin with Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce with all the details on how this all came together. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, Rebecca. Well, overnight, those emotional and enthusiastic reunions on the tarmac, moments of pure joy and elation made possible by painstaking negotiations and the power of diplomacy. The president saying it represents the essence of who we are as a country. Early this morning, the 3 Americans wrongfully detained in Russia arriving safely in Texas to begin the next phase of their journey.
I'm glad I'm home. Yeah. I'm never going back there again.
The 3 now set to undergo medical evaluations after being in Russian custody, some for months, others for years. Just hours before, an emotional moment as the 3 Americans touched down back home on U.S. soil. First off, former Marine Paul Whelan. After 5.5 years in captivity, a salute. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich smiling, appearing a bit in awe, with a giant hug for his mom. And Russian-American journalist Alsu Kurmasheva embracing her family, holding them close. The 3 now back where they belong, released as part of the largest, most complicated prisoner exchange since the Cold War.
Evan, how are you feeling?
I'm all right. It was a good flight.
What about the show of support?
It's yeah, it's overwhelming.
President Biden and Vice President Harris also on hand for the dramatic. dramatic reunion at Joint Base Andrews outside Washington.
It was wonderful. 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 It was wonderf
Long time in coming.
Their journey to freedom beginning with this bus ride to the tarmac in Russia. Gerskovich seen appearing to crack a smile after nearly 17 months in Russian captivity. Then the tense handoff on this tarmac in Turkey, the sweeping deal involving 24 prisoners and at least 6 different countries. Shortly after the swap was complete back in Washington, the president breaking the good news to their families gathered in the Oval Office, then picking up the phone.
Can you hear me? It's Joe Biden.
The families speaking for the first time with their loved ones, knowing they were finally coming home.
I miss you so much.
The Americans then boarding the plane back to the U.S., celebrating with the team sent to pick them up.
Their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free.
Biden noting Kurmasheva's daughter, Miriam, will now be able to celebrate her 13th birthday today with her mother by her side.
Now she gets to celebrate with her mom. That's what this is all about. Families able to be together again, like they should have been all along.
The president saying the deal shows the power of diplomacy.
The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again. So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter.
Biden directly involved in the negotiations, personally enlisting the help of foreign leaders. Even an hour before he announced he would not seek re-election, Biden on the phone, trying to get this deal over the finish line. But until that moment, when they were in U.S. custody, officials on pins and needles. Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who is deeply involved in negotiations, emotional and relieved.
Today was a very good day.
And a day long in the making. Whelan's twin brother David exclusively telling ABC News the family worked tirelessly for this moment, with Paul left out of 2 prior deals.
I didn't really allow myself to believe that it was going to happen until I saw that announcement by the White House. And of course, we're overjoyed.
While in prison, Gerskovich honing his formal Russian language skills, reading famous Russian literature, even working on a book. After months of waiting and advocating on his behalf, the Wall Street Journal newsroom erupting in cheers at the news of his release. And sharing this remarkable detail. Before his release, an audacious request. The dogged reporter asking Russian President Vladimir Putin for an interview.
He has a sense of humor, a sophisticated sense of humor that serves up his captor with basically a message that you never really imprisoned me.
But Putin would not agree to return the Americans without the release of a few key Russian criminals in exchange. The Russian president seen welcoming 8 of them back home, including the man Putin insisted had to be a part of this deal, Vadim Krasikov, a convicted murderer and Russian hitman. Now, as part of this deal, in total, 16 people held by Russia are now free this morning. The U.S. had hoped that this deal would also include Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, but of course he died in February behind bars. The Kremlin was, of course, blamed for that. It was a huge blow to these negotiations, but officials here say they were determined. They still saw a path forward, just a more rocky one. The president adamant he wanted to get this done with the time he has left in office. Lara.
All right, Mary, thank you. Such good news, though, for those folks. The freed Americans now arrived in San Antonio early this morning, where they will be evaluated, debriefed, and prepared to re-enter society. Mireya Villarreal is in San Antonio this morning with the story. Good morning, Mireya.
Hey, good morning, Lara. All 3 Americans made their way to Joint Base San Antonio, landing at around 3:30 this morning. This is where they will begin their new chapter as freed Americans in the United States. Now, they are right behind me at Brooke Army Medical Center. This is where they will get access to what's called post-isolation support activities. This is also known as the reintegration program that is meant for military personnel and civilians who've been held captive overseas. The program requires physical checkups, but it's primarily designed to help them decompress and meet with mental health experts. WNBA star Brittany Griner went through this program back in December of 2022 after her release from imprisonment in Russia. She released a statement saying, in part, "We are overwhelmed with joy and relief for the U.S. citizens who returned safely to America today. Now, we don't know exactly how long each of these people will be here at BAMC. Each one of them will vary the timing here. But what we do know is as civilians, once they are given the green light, the go-ahead, they can go ahead and meet once again with their family and get ready to go back home. Whit.
All right, Mireya, thank you. Joining us now is White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, good morning to you. It's great to have you. So we saw a different side of you yesterday, getting emotional talking about those difficult discussions behind the scenes. And then overnight, you witnessed that special moment. I wonder, what was it like watching those Americans step off the plane on U.S. soil?
Well, it's really hard to describe because it was such a human victory. 3 innocent people reunited with their families, their loved ones. Getting to see that was just incredible. But I think it was also a victory for our country. This was the United States of America at its best, working with our allies to bring our people home safe and also to help free freedom fighters, Russians who have fought for democracy in their country and who had been thrown in prison for treason or worse. To be able to be a part of that was truly one of the most extraordinary honors in my life.
And the Americans, how would you describe their conditions? How are they doing this morning?
They were very upbeat last night, and I'll leave it to the doctors who will want to give them a full physical workup out in San Antonio where they were taken, where all of the unjustly detained Americans who are released get taken. But they certainly look to be in good spirits and positive, and of course anytime you get to get off a plane and see your loved ones there after such a long time, it's going to give you a real boost.
And as you know, this deal incredibly complex. 24 prisoners, half a dozen countries. When did you know it was really going to happen, and what was President Biden's role?
Well, to be honest, I knew when I got the call that said the exchange was done. Before that, I thought something could go wrong. But the deal had been in the works for weeks, and in the closing days it became more and more likely that it was going to happen, but I didn't know for sure until it actually did happen. President Biden's role, simple. He did it. He did this deal. It would not have happened without him because it was his relationships with key allies that unlocked the elements we needed to put this deal together, and it was his direction to me and our team that said, figure out a way to execute this so that we get these people home, and that's exactly what happened.
And of course, as you know too, the key to this deal was Krasikov, the convicted assassin who is being held in Germany. How do you respond to criticism that these types of deals only encourage Putin to jail more innocent Americans, to use them as bargaining chips in the future?
Well, first, we've actually looked at the evidence of this over the last 3.5 years. And if you go back to the beginning of the Biden administration, there were a lot more unjustly detained Americans and hostages held overseas than there are today. We've done deals to get 70 Americans out, and we haven't seen another 70 Americans taken. Could that change in the future? It's possible. These are the risks that you have to weigh when you make hard decisions like the president did to get people home. But we think in the cost-benefit analysis, it made sense to do this deal because America gained and innocent Americans are home free and safe.
And speaking of those tough decisions, what about other Americans still in Russia, like Mark Fogel, the teacher serving a 14-year sentence, his family calling it wrong and unacceptable that he wasn't included in this deal? What are you doing for him and others?
Look, we fight for every American to get them to be part of deals, to get them out. We can't always get every person out at the same time. We've seen that before in Russia. Paul Whelan, we were unable to get out in previous deals. We got him out here. And what I can say, and I said this at the podium yesterday, I am personally working on that case, and I'm going to do everything in my power to see Mark get home.
Former President Donald Trump and some of his allies have questioned what the U.S. may have given up in return for these American prisoners. Could you just clarify for us whether anything was offered to the Russians beyond the prisoners in this exchange?
I will happily clarify that nothing was offered to the Russians beyond the prisoners in this exchange. That's it. That's the only thing that was offered. And to the criticism of President Trump, Paul Whelan was taken by the Russians when President Trump was president. Joe Biden got him freed.
Jake Sullivan for us this morning. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rebecca?
Thank you, Whit. We turn now to the race for the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris could officially lock up the Democratic nomination as early as today as she comes closer to locking in her running mate. Rachel Scott is following the latest developments. Good morning, Rachel.
Hey, Rebecca, good morning to you. That's exactly right. Vice President Kamala Harris could just be hours away from officially locking in the Democratic nomination for president. In fact, just moments ago, we learned that her team is already planning a virtual celebration for later this afternoon. Overnight, the Harris campaign announcing this morning they have raised $310 million in July. And all eyes now turn to who Harris will pick to be her running mate. We're expecting that decision by Tuesday. Sources tell ABC News that her vetting team has met with three leading contenders: Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump continues to double down on his controversial attacks, questioning Vice President Kamala Harris's racial identity. While some Republicans have said those attacks went too far, his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, who is the father of three biracial children, rushed to his defense, saying those comments do not give him any pause at all. Harris, for her part, not directly weighing in on those attacks from the former president, but she goes on to say that the Republican ticket continues to divide this country. Whit.
Rachel Scott for us, thank you so much. Now to the dramatic new details on the assassination of a top Hamas official in Tehran. Sources tell ABC News that the explosive device used was smuggled into his room 2 months ago. Matt Rivers is in Tel Aviv with the latest. Matt, good morning.
Good morning, Whit. Stunning new details in the assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Haniyeh's funeral this morning in Qatar. He was killed by an explosive device that had been planted in his room as a part of an Israeli plot. Three Middle Eastern sources confirming to ABC News, first reported by the New York Times. One of those sources saying the bomb was smuggled inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps guest house roughly 2 months ago and was detonated just before 2 a.m. local time on Wednesday, once it was confirmed that Haniyeh was in the room. Meanwhile, President Biden speaking with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu overnight, saying once again the U.S. will help defend Israel against any retaliations. Lara?
All right, Matt, thank you. We're going to turn now to the jobs report after stocks had one of their worst days of the year. Elizabeth Schulze has the details. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Lara. This jobs report shows employers are hiring at a slower pace than expected. 114,000 jobs were added to the workforce in July. That was way below expectations, and it's well below the trend of 215,000 new jobs per month over the past year. Another concern here, the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3%. Still an overall historically strong number, but it has been going up. This cooling jobs market is making some investors nervous. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on Thursday tumbled almost 500 points. That's down 1.2%. And the S&P 500, which is what tracks most Americans' retirement accounts, also traded lower. But when you take a step back and look at the S&P's performance so far this year, it is still up 14%. For the typical 401k balance that stayed invested in stocks, that translates to a gain of about $18,000 just since January. Guys.
Silver lining in there. All right, Elizabeth, thank you.